Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the channel. I am Brian Lusk. Thank you for joining me this evening. I already see Luciano on here, so glad to have you here already. Let's go ahead and get rolling right away with, well, something from Anton Herischenko here. For democracy and freedom to prevail, it's essential to unite, not become divided. Violence, escalation, aggression weaken democracies and strengthen tyrannies, feeding chaos. I don't want to sound pessimistic, but recent news made me feel that way. I will just say I am doing all I can. My country's fate is to defend herself from a powerful and immoral enemy in a horrible war. We have no choice but to defend ourselves and fight. Despite everything, there are people, communities, and countries that support us and are our friends. We continue our action in the darkness that is rising. I want to thank all good, honest, and kind people who stand with us. Step by step, action by action, not losing faith and hope, we will continue our efforts in Ukraine's favor. That's Anton Herischenko's thoughts. This was about the time, as I recall, that news of the assassination attempt on President Donald Trump had taken place. So I can understand feeling a little bit low at that particular moment, even for one who is not in our nation and whose focus is somewhere else. Still, let's go ahead and get into the news out of Ukraine itself. Ukraine is flying a new jet-powered drone, the Bullet, intended for interception of Russian drones. 5 drones cost just $141,000 or about $28,000 per drone. So that's a nice little cheaper way to do a little bit of air defense, and quite interesting to boot. Should be. I'll be looking forward to seeing if there's any test reports, or shall we say, field reports of the use of these new drones. The Russians are reportedly recruiting Ukrainians to carry out arson attacks, with 3 vehicles having been destroyed in various places across the country so far. Ukrainian army vehicles. Was reported as 3 of them burned in 3 different cities. A Mitsubishi Pajero of a serviceman was set on fire in Lviv, and 2 bottles of kerosene were found at the scene. 2 vehicles of the Ukrainian armed forces were burned in Odessa, namely a Sanyong and a Nissan Navara. The 4th case, which was just reported earlier today, was recorded in Rivne. A Nissan X-Trail was burned there, which volunteers brought to the Ukrainian armed forces for transfer. So the Russians are more than willing to throw the money around to try and cause a little bit of chaos on the Ukrainian side of the line as well. There was another vehicle set on fire in Odessa, which makes a 4th vehicle, as I understand it. So again, this is a continuing pattern that the Russians are carrying out. The Special Battalion Shkval, consisting of volunteer prisoners as part of the 47th Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, successfully carries out a mission to clear an enemy tree line in the Pokrovsk direction with the support of Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. Now, this battalion consists of citizens who serve sentences in prisons and is formed of volunteers who themselves decided to defend Ukraine. The 47th Recruiting Department approached the selection very responsibly, and therefore each of the ex-prisoners passed an interview. This is nothing like the kamikaze attacks that the Russians are pulling off. From BBC Russian, the Ministry of Veteran Affairs of Ukraine is going to provide compensation to combat veterans for housing rent for 6 months after returning from the war, announced by Acting Minister Oleksandr Porkun. Interesting indeed, and at least it's something they're doing for their returning veterans, to at least help them to get back on their feet after they return from the war. A poll says that almost 44% of Ukrainians think it is time for official peace negotiations with Russia, according to a survey published by the ZNUA media outlet on July 15th. But at the same time, the majority of respondents were also opposed to the current ceasefire conditions as laid out by Russian President Vladimir Putin, which would entail the complete Ukrainian withdrawal from the 4 regions that are partially occupied by Russia. So, according to this one singular poll, just so we're clear, it is just one poll. Um, the Ukrainians are saying, "Hey, look, we want some peace negotiations to happen." However, they also don't want the conditions that Russia's put on them. So we'll have to see how that turns out. And finally, on Ukraine, Syrskyi has ordered the inspection of the 59th Motorized Brigade after a string of recent losses. The commander-in-chief of Ukraine's armed forces, Oleksandr Syrskyi, ordered an inspection of the 59th Separate Motorized Brigade Yakov Handziuk due to the unit's recent losses. The announcement came only a day after Azovstal defender and medic Katyana Polishchuk, known under the nickname Sashka, there we go, called on Syrskyi and President Zelensky to investigate the unit over the alleged misconduct of its commander, Bohdan Sevchuk. And this is pretty darn fast. As I understand it, that was her accusations only happened yesterday, which indicates to me that the leadership over in Ukraine had been watching that particular unit and was wondering what was going on before the complaint was put out there. So, if nothing else, they're looking into what's going on, maybe having to shake things up to make that back into an effective unit once again. From news out of Russia now, unconstrained by facts or journalistic standards, striving to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, Russian propagandists are now blaming both the Democrats and Ukrainians for an attempt on Trump's life and hoping it will ignite a civil war in the United States. Now, they've been gloating over this attempted shooting, saying that Trump is going to win from it and that they love Trump. Regardless of how you feel about it, number one, if it was intentional, it's too early. 4 months is not is too early for it to have the effect they would want. This would have been if it was a deliberately carried out and planned attack. The time to have done it would have been October, an October surprise. If they were intending for it to actually help Trump. Now, there's all kinds of disinformation already shooting through the interwebs about the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. They have identified the shooter, Mr. Crooks. No joke. And he is apparently a registered Republican, but his parents are, let me see, as I recall, a psychologist and maybe a professor or a teacher, indicating likely he was raised in a Democrat home. Just overall, this is a mixed bag of information that we're just going to have to wait for more information to come out on to figure out what really was going on in that young man's head. In fact, the rifle was identified as being owned by the young man's father, legally purchased, and it was reported, though I've not seen confirmation, that he tried to get into his high school rifle club, but couldn't actually shoot well enough to do so. There's a lot of things going on there. In fact, on top of that, and since I'm just kind of quickly touching on all of this as we're going by, there's also a report that a police officer actually confronted him before he took the shot, and the Mr. Crooks pointed his rifle at the officer. The officer retreated, and that's when the Mr. Crooks opened fire, taking several hasty shots at Donald Trump. So we've got a lot of information coming out about that. It just happened to be relevant to that spot where we were talking about Russia. Jerry and Lucille, glad to have you all on board. Always good to have you on the stream. A Russian general has reportedly forbidden troops in the Kherson region from recovering the bodies of the dead. With temperatures approaching 40 degrees Celsius, this is likely to worsen the already extreme conditions currently being endured by the Russians. Likely this is going to result in a lot more disease and problems. They've already had a whole lot of problems with water supply, successfully getting through all of this area. So It's bad conditions over in Kherson region for the Russians in that area. Now let's talk about the item that I mentioned in the title today. How the war in Ukraine is reviving Russia's Rust Belt. Now, just so we're clear on something here, one of the we're talking a Rust Belt similar to a manufacturing center, similar to the U.S.'s equivalent. So this is a fairly as people move to high tech manufacturing or exporting manufacturing jobs overseas, these types of facilities became quickly uneconomical to operate. And the Russians are saying is that now that they're at war, they're able to revive those industries again. Now, let's put this in context here. That is correct. They can revive those industries. Many of them do rely on Western uh, dyes and equipment and tools to be able to bring back to full operation. Still, if they're doing baseline metalworking and things like that, they don't have to get too, shall we say, precise in order to carry out manufacturing processes. And if they can get some of those advanced weapons, for not advanced weapons, advanced tools from, say, China, they can continue to produce a relatively low tech levels of equipment. We're talking tanks without advanced optics. We're talking trucks. We're talking, things that you could throw at a military operation in quantities to try and win in the end. That does not mean they're going to be cranking out more of their T90Ms, which is their premier current modern tank with modern optics and things like this. This doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be cranking out, say, howitzer tubes or barrels or artillery piece barrels, though that certainly would be the area that I would be focusing on if I was them. But either way, this is basically their Rust Belt area, the depressed areas that had the manufacturing jobs just go away and nothing ever replaced them. And so now that Russia is getting serious about let me get my screen back up again here. Now that Russia is getting serious about shall we say bringing those things back to life, it's an addictive drug, is what it is. Their economy is growing because they are reactivating these old portions of their economy, being able to bring it back into an operational status and be able to put people to work, get that manufacturing thing going again. And the end result is that if the war ends, all that manufacturing and all that economic output stops for Russia. So at this point, they're looking at a situation where they cannot afford to not be at war. Now we're talking a nation that has invaded Chechnya, Georgia, and a bunch of other smaller conflicts throughout this entire time. We sort of, in the West, don't think about what Russia has been doing over the last 30 some years since they collapsed. But when you start looking at the quantities of conflicts they've been involved in, all relatively low intensity, comparatively speaking, all relatively weaker opponents than even Ukraine is, and they were pretty confident they'd be able to make that next step. Of course, some of that was the fact that they thought that the Ukrainians would accept them as liberators, not look at them as invaders. In the end, though, their manufacturing and their capabilities have now reached the point where if they shut down the war, it's going to tank their economy. And that's what we're looking at right now. More about Donald Trump. I don't think we need to go into this, but just summary here. He this another one of Russia's propagandists. This time, the Dugin, I believe, is his name. Says that it was carried out by a combination of Ukrainian Nazism, liberalism, and cultural Marxism with the LGBT community, with Schwab, Zuckerberg, Harari, Kurzweil, and American deep state. He literally hit a who's who of bogeyman that the Russians believe are involved in everything in the world. A Russian military unit near Cape Fleet was attacked in temporarily occupied Crimea. There were 8 explosions. This is a division of S-300 or 400 air defense systems. There have been reports that they may have hit the radar station. Also, there were explosions of potentially S-400s. The Ukrainians are continuing to put missiles on targets in Crimea, and that's where the biggest activity is. Russians also report that a train went off the rails in Stary Oskol, Belgorod region of Russia. This happened at night near the Lebedensky mining and processing plant, with no reasons for the accident given. There were several train accidents right near the same time. Let's go ahead and get this translated as well. This is about the Belgorod train here. This one reports it as being a head-on collision between it and another train, saying that it was an 85-kilometer head-on impact. I've seen other sources run that up to 100 kilometers per hour. However, that wasn't the only train. There was also another one in Voronezh. This one they suspect sabotage on. So, interesting there. A lot of partisan activity going on. Come on, translate my stuff here. All right, fine. I will refresh you here. And there we go. Most of the ships of the Russian Black Sea Fleet have returned from the Sea of Azov to the naval base in Novorossiysk. That means they are fully loaded over in Novorossiysk with nearly the entire Black Sea Fleet in attendance at the location. You can see an entire list of all the vessels that they were able to count as being there. But there's something that caught somebody else's attention. Let's see if I can get it pulled up here. And that is that the last Russian patrol ship is leaving Crimea, sailing out of Sevastopol. This is the Project 1135 patrol ship, which was recently moored in Sevastopol. And now that it's gone, there are, well, basically only rusty junk. A couple of minesweepers and a small anti-submarine ship left in Sevastopol. Now, this one was a still kind of developing when I came across it this morning. Subscribers from the Katusha Gardening Association on Monastrisko, Sosha in Fialant reported that it was not the missile unit that was damaged by Ukrainian drones, but the military unit of the Russian Black Sea Fleet Electronic Intelligence, located nearby, quote, behind the fence. There are also antennas there that look like radar antennas, as well as satellite antennas. So it could have been a communications center instead of the S-400 system, the air defense system, that may have been taken out. That said, why not both? So both could certainly be accurate. From BBC Russian, and I think I've got this again later, according to British intelligence, there we go, domestic gas prices are rising in Russia. They did a daily review of gas prices starting at the beginning of July. The surge is almost certainly intended to boost revenues from the Russian domestic market in response to the loss of revenue from gas exports to Europe, in turn caused by sanctions and Russia's own actions to cut supplies. Now, they do talk about Gazprom losing a lot of money, especially right now. But the only reason to raise these controlled prices is because the Russians need more of this green money, or any color money, I guess. I haven't looked at a ruble lately, but they need money to continue prosecuting their war efforts. Russia is also reporting that they are going to be blocking YouTube soon, beginning immediately with a partial block, and by, I believe it's September, expecting to fully block the service in Russia. Apparently, they can't get enough of their of the vague entertainment that comes from YouTube these days. Maybe they're worried that people are actually getting accurate information. A large forest fire damaged about 40 buildings at a recreation center near Novorossiysk. Now, this is over in Russia proper. There's been no report as to how it started or anything like that. It's just interesting that all of a sudden there's this forest fire in the area. Novorossiysk is, of course, where the Russian Black Sea Fleet is. They did also report in other sources that they had to evacuate some 500 people. Uh, I haven't heard any updates since then. In other news about Russia, Russia is now apparently busting their 130 millimeter artillery systems back out of storage. There were the M46 130 millimeter cannons developed back in the 50s that have begun to show as being transited back to the front lines. Now, Russia has not been producing domestically 130 millimeter ammunition. However, there is likely a large quantity that came from North Korea. And that's about the gas prices there. I think we've already beat that particular horse. And then, of course, as always, the Russians claim that they have shot down all the drones. A quote, deactivated Ukrainian drone damaged a Russian oil tank in the Oryol region, according to RIA. These oil tanks are so unlucky to catch all these shot down drones over and over. And apparently, from what I've read elsewhere, the Ukrainians have hit one oil depot a day for the last week, keeping the pressure on the Russians and their ability to refine and make oil products. All right, let's go ahead and go on to the international front here. Al, glad to see you. Always glad to have you on board, and glad that you managed to make it over here even late. I appreciate it either way. Yes, it's clearly a sign of a free society when they have to limit access to information so terribly much. From Anton Herischenko, Hungary, who is now chairing the EU Council, plans to host a foreign affairs summit in Budapest on August 28th through 29th. However, after Viktor Orban's meetings with Putin and Xi Jinping, which weren't coordinated with the rest of the EU, Josep Borrell, the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, has scheduled a Foreign Affairs Council for the foreign ministers at the same time as Hungary's forum. This is basically boycotting something that was arranged by Viktor Orban, stating that you don't speak for us, we speak for ourselves. Thank you very much, Mr. Orban. Quite almost call it a coup over in the European Union. Not really, because it's just basically giving the thumb to Orban's attempts to work on behalf of Russia. The Estonian Prime Minister, Kaja Kallas, has resigned. She'll be continuing to operate for a little bit until a new government is set up. But she has taken over the post of High Representative of the EU for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy from the aforementioned Josep Borrell. So she's getting ready to serve in her new role, and her government will need to be reformed in her absence. Ukraine and NATO have approved a strategic review of defense procurement, as reported on the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine website. Now, Ukraine's defense procurement will be in line with the best Euro-Atlantic practices. This is yet another step to getting Ukraine ready to join NATO by universalizing their processes into NATO standards and making it more possible for them to integrate easily. Spain has ponied up a bunch of new military aid, which includes 10 refurbished Leopard 2A4 tanks. Now, the 2A4 is not the most current model. The 2A7 is. Still, it sports a 120 millimeter smoothbore gun. It's very, very good, very effective, capable. It does very well on the battlefields of Ukraine, and far better than the Leopard 1s. Some might even say better than the Abrams tanks. We've mentioned before that Ukraine's been working on bilateral agreements, security agreements. They've got 9 more countries they're working on, along with the 23 they've already signed agreements with. So they're continuing to make the charm offensive to set up their relationships for the future. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who we talked about earlier, informed European Union leaders about his, quote, peace plan following his visits to Kiev and Moscow. He added that after Viktor Orban's visits to Kiev and Moscow, it became clear that Ukraine and Russia are determined to continue fighting. That's right. Ukraine wants their property back and their people back. There are people that are suffering, being tortured in various ways. I'll leave it at that. Uh, as opposed to being full citizens in Russia, they want to save their people. Whereas Russia, as we mentioned earlier, can't afford to stop. On the downside, NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has rejected Poland's proposal to intercept Russian missiles over Ukraine. And they did not give a reason per se. I think it was talking about potential escalation, as they are wont to do. The German opposition leader has said they want Berlin to send combat planes to Kyiv. Quote, I believe that we should help Ukraine to at least restore sovereignty over its own airspace, according to Christian Democratic Union politician Friedrich Merz. Now, the problem that Olaf Scholz pointed out is that the Germans operate, I believe it's Eurofighter Typhoons. That would be yet another aircraft type that Ukraine would have to adopt and bring into their service. It's basically saying, oh no, and we just can't do that because it's not the same thing as the other things that Ukraine might operate. Right now, Ukraine would be happy with anything with wings and an engine. I think that we need to start thinking along those lines. And that's the international front. We're a little bit light today, which I think is probably pretty good. Still, we're onto the front lines here, and we're going to start off with War Gonzo. Don't normally start with War Gonzo, but he does touch on some important things in this one. Donetsk front, the Russian armed forces continue to advance into Orozhine. Now, the later reports indicate that the Russians have taken Orozhine, which is on the south end, east of Robotyne area considerably, and south of Donetsk. So overall, the Russians appear to have made some progress in that area to the point where they've actually taken the city. Fighting continues on the outskirts of Konstantinovka and Krasnodarivka. The Russian armed forces are advancing, continuing to push the Ukrainian garrison to the outskirts of the city. Now, Krasnodarivka has got some interesting things going on. I think I found a good write-up on the situation there, but I want to confirm some details before I review that with you in full. So for today, I'm going to just let that go. If I can get it confirmed by the next video, I'll toss it in. In Novosilovka, Pervaya, Russian troops continue to, quote, liberate the territory of the settlement. The same is true in New York, where the Russian forces are advancing further in the central part. And this is a relatively accurate summation of what appears to be going on down there. This is not good news for Ukraine. That said, there's still a lot of fighting to be done, and if they keep going at this current rate, Russia will have all of Ukraine in, I think, about 300 some years. One side or the other will break long before then. Chasiv Yar, they just report fighting continuing. Kharkiv front, the Ukrainian armed forces continue to regularly attack, but he says without much success. We're seeing small successes on the part of the Ukrainians. Fierce fighting in Volchansk and I believe that's supposed to be Hlyboka area. No significant changes in the lines of control. Pretty decent summary of the situation. Krasnodarivka, from the Ukraine control map, more geolocations appear to show the Russians are pushing further into the town. While the exact lines of control are unclear, they're putting that in the gray zone. Then there's a report from a Ukrainian officer who says that Russian troops are regrouping in the Kharkiv sector. Now, here's the thing about the Kharkiv sector. They have been assaulting with partial and wounded soldiers for some time. The Russians have. So regrouping is probably an opportunity for Ukraine, depending on how they're doing it. Either way, though, it still indicates that the Russians do not intend to step out of their territory voluntarily. Moving over to Knoll reports. Russians have made a small advance towards Pivdinye, which is according to geolocated, so that's confirmed. I'm going to have to, when I get back to my computer, I'm going to have to get the full map back up again so I can draw some arrows on it for you guys. Geolocated footage shows Russian advances east of the settlement of Novoselivka, Persia. We already mentioned that during the War Gonzo bit. While also the area directly north is contested, but possibly already Russian occupied. Let's see. Basically the same information as before. Just keep on going here. And of course, the confirmation that Russia has occupied Orozhine completely. This is a lot of back and forth fighting, with the Ukrainians finally having to retreat to the outskirts of the town. So this is basically another flattened town. The Russians are not capturing anything except rubble and ruins. It still is pretty heartbreaking to have that territory lost. And that's the situation on the front lines. I've got some interesting extras here. Nothing direct. I mean, there's a couple of items that are related to the war in Ukraine directly, but some other interesting items here. How about this 1988 East German map of West Berlin? If you look carefully, you'll see that all of West Berlin is nothing but white, entirely unmapped. They don't want to give their East German citizens the ability to see where they might want to go if they had to run out of East Berlin to West. A Russian soldier complains about the hostile attitude of local pro-Ukrainian residents in temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories. The Russians genuinely expected initially that they would waltz into Ukraine, that the Ukrainian citizens would be, oh, thank goodness, you're here to save us, and totally jump on board saying, we are Russian now. All singing the Russian national anthem and happily accepting their, quote, liberators. However, now that they've spent some time in Ukraine, they've learned that their initial thoughts were entirely wrong. Ukraine does not want Russians there. They want them out. And he actually, if you look carefully, you'll see he's dressed in civilian clothing. That's because if he walks around in a Russian uniform, he's going to get probably attacked or at least yelled at by the locals. Kind of hard to see here. Let me see if I can bring this up to a larger version. This is a Ukrainian defender who was not in uniform. You'll notice he was in t-shirt and shorts, getting out his SAM missile there and shooting down a drone. Listen to that celebration right there. Excited, excited, excited. Now this, we're going to move over to U.S. domestic politics for just a moment or two. Judge Cannon, who is the one overseeing the classified documents case, has dismissed the Trump documents case, citing violations of the Appointments Clause. Specifically, she says that special counsel Jack Smith was not appropriately appointed to the position. Special counsel is supposed to be, according to the interpretations of the law I have read. I am not a lawyer, but this is just my interpretation of what I've read so far. Apparently, they are supposed to be appointed from among already serving U.S. attorneys. Jack Smith was a private citizen and was not a serving U.S. attorney at the time, and in fact is still not because he was a private citizen. Therefore, he was not appropriately appointed, according to Eileen Cannon. Now, Jack Smith can appeal this ruling, and that's when things start getting interesting. I don't know where it'll go, but Eileen Cannon apparently relied a lot on the recent presidential immunity decision to make her to tie in her decision using some of the information from there. So overall, that's the situation on the what was going to be the most robust of the Trump lawsuits. Now, instead, that has ended up being, well, dismissed. We'll see what happens on appeal. There was a terrorist attack during the Euro 2024 finals in Somalia that killed 5 fans. An explosion occurred yesterday evening in Mogadishu near the Top Coffee Cafe, where fans were watching the final match of Euro 2024 between Spain and England on a big screen. A car bomb detonated in a nearby parking lot. According to local authorities, more than 20 people were injured and 5 were killed. No terrorist group operating in the region has yet claimed responsibility for the attack. This tells you kind of what the world we're living in now, where the hearts of men are beginning to run cold, where they no longer see each other as brothers and sisters, but as enemies. Always a concern. Back to the Trump shooting situation there, the Trump assassination attempt. Apparently, the car of the shooter was found and there were explosive devices inside. No telling what he was intending to do with those explosives, but just one more little tidbit of data. Now, the country of Georgia did pass the foreign agents registration law, the one that the Kremlin has been pushing for because they can use it against everybody else. Well, the Georgian president vetoed that law, and that veto, as I recall, was overturned. However, now she's going to appeal to the country's constitutional court to seek the cancellation of that law. So we'll have to see if that continues and makes anything happen. Now, things are a little bit back and forth in this section, so please bear with me. U.S. President Joe Biden, in his Oval Office address, emphasized his speech that politics must never be a battlefield. Disagreement is inevitable and part of American democracy, but politics must never be a literal battlefield or, God forbid, a killing field. Yesterday's shooting at a Donald Trump rally in Pennsylvania calls on all of us to take a step back, assess where we are, and figure out how to move forward. Now, I did watch the rest of this address here, and he did have some problems with part of it, saying the battle box instead of the ballot box, and they had to cut it several times to get it to string together properly. But when he's talking, he nails it, at least in the sense of, we need to figure out how we can move forward without using guns to solve our differences. Speaking of, and I don't have this on my agenda for today, Donald Trump has picked his vice presidential candidate. It is J.D. Vance, the senator from Ohio. Now, from a perspective of Ukraine, J.D. Vance has been one of the staunchest opponents to Ukraine aid. Literally calling it waste and everything else like that. So if this is the case, we might see a new direction, or I should say a continuation of the direction for the Donald Trump presidency if he wins the election. And we're going to end with, this Ukrainian cat is so tired. Oh, let me get this flipped over here. There we go. This Ukrainian cat is so tired of passersby waking him up that he learned to write. The note says, "I'm alive, I'm sleeping." This is in Ternopil, Ukraine. Now, I don't know if that translation is accurate, but it's funny nonetheless. Poor cat's just tuckered out. And that is everything for today. Thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate you guys being here. A lot of things I had to run through on this one, but not as much as the day before, or the last video. So I do appreciate your patience and bearing with me as we put things together. Now, I've just received the word that the hotel has overbooked, and so I will be having to change hotel rooms in a couple of days here. That will probably interrupt a few things for a few days, but I'll try and get whatever I can done to get a stream in the meantime. So be advised there could be an interruption, but overall, I just want you to know that once again, I very much appreciate you guys. All of you are what make these streams worthwhile. Your interaction, your comments, your thoughts, your passion for the subject at hand. Thank you again. I do want to know if you appreciated the content covering the presidential election, the assassination. I did do a fast live stream the other day touching on the assassination attempt. So I would appreciate your feedback if you appreciate that type of not exactly breaking news by the time I was putting it on live stream, but kind of a quick, here's what I could confirm type of a stream. I do appreciate it. And again, y'all have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.